Hello, today I'm going to be talking about the themes of loneliness and depression in The Catcher in the Rye by Ahmed Elwi. Who is J.D. Salinger? Well, J.D. Salinger was an American writer born on January 1st, 1919 in Manhattan, New York, United States. Salinger was born the year after World War I was over. His adolescence was spent in the Roaring Twenties. He was also alive for World War II, and he also fought in the war for the American Army. Salinger devoted his life to writing after the war. He started his career with a few short stories. Salinger's first published novel was The Catcher in the Rye, an award-winning novel. Salinger's writing style could be described as he writes as he speaks, which ultimately makes his writing fun and easy to read. His writing style allows the reader to be more immersed in the text rather than analyzing for new words, and it also allows the reader to flow better while reading. Salinger is believed to have changed the way people write. The Catcher in the Rye. The Catcher in the Rye is a novel written in 1951 by J.D. Salinger. Salinger wrote the book from Holden Caulfield's point of view. Unlike many teenagers, Holden finds pleasure in meandering around the city, New York, and in his thoughts. On the other hand, like many teenagers, Holden is rebellious. Most of his gestures are aimless, and he is full of cynicism. Throughout the novel, Holden's interactions with others and his thoughts reflect the issues that he is facing. Salinger covers multiple themes in his book, such as alienation, depression, and loneliness. Focusing on the theme of loneliness because it acts as an umbrella, the other themes stem from it. Holden's thinking process followed by his actions were two significant ways that the theme of loneliness and depression were represented. Next, let's move on to our thesis. The themes of depression, loneliness, and alienation from society are the most predominant in Salinger's novel, The Catcher in the Rye. To begin with, let's talk about the loneliness that Holden felt at school. In chapter 1 of the novel, Salinger chooses to display Holden's cynical view of society, the people around him, and events. Salinger's compelling writing style allows the reader to build an idea of Holden's characteristics and traits very early on in the novel. For example, Holden expresses his emotions about the football game by saying, "The whole school except me was there." Holden's stubbornness and rebelliousness do not allow him to admit his true feelings. Although the audience can sense that Holden is an outcast and that he is alienated from the rest of society, his peers specifically, whether he admits it or not. Ali's death. Partially, Holden's loneliness and alienation are derived from his brother's death. Holden could not connect with the rest of the world because he was too occupied with his fantasies. The death of Ali Caulfield spiked feelings of guilt in Holden. He could not save his brother. This propelled Holden to develop his dream job, the catcher in the rye, to catch children running towards a cliff. He wanted to save innocent children from their death. Holden is so depressed by Ali's death that he loses his sense of reality. He says, "I would just be the catcher in the rye and all. I know it's crazy, but that's the only thing I would really like to be." Holden believes that saving the innocent children will heal his pain caused by his brother's death. This is evident throughout the story. An example from chapter 14 is when old Sonny left Holden alone in his hotel room. Holden described how he felt. "Boy, I felt miserable. I felt so depressed." On top of that, to display to the audience Holden's love for Ali and the comfort he finds in his brother, Holden says, "What I did, I started talking sort of out loud to Ali. I do that sometimes when I get very depressed." Ali's death evidently took a toll on Holden's mental health. And here is a visual representation of Holden's dream job, to be the catcher in the rye. He couldn't save his brother Elwi from his death, but he wants to save other kids from their death. And I like this picture because it has a baseball glove, which literally represents that he's a catcher. Next up is Holden's brotherhood with Elwi. Holden truly loved Elwi, and he meant a lot to him. Holden thinks and mentions Elwi multiple times throughout the novel, and he confesses that it burdens him that his brother is dead. Holden is bothered that others can get in their cars and turn on their radios and all, and then go someplace nice for dinner. Everybody except for Elwi. Evidently, Holden is depressed by his brother's death, and he feels alienated from the rest of society because he does not have a functional family. He is bothered that others live a normal life, while his brother died at a young age, and now he himself cannot enjoy life. Consequently, Holden felt alienated and isolated from others, and his abilities to communicate and connect with others were severely hindered by Elwi's death. Now let's talk about the effects of others on Holden. Throughout the novel, Holden felt lonesome most of the time, often because of the people around him. In Chapter 7, for instance, following Holden's fight with Stradlater over the composition Holden wrote, Holden was in his room staring out of the window and expressed, "I felt so lonesome. All of a sudden, I almost wished I was dead." Another time where a stranger made Holden feel depressed and alienated was at the park. The little girl seemed like she needed help tightening her skates at the park, so naturally, Holden helped her. He was glad that the little girl was not a phony and that she was respectful. He said, "God, I love it when a kid's nice and polite." Later, he asked her for hot chocolate, and she refused kindly because she had to meet her friends. Holden was not mad at her, but he was disturbed with the situation, stating, "Kids always have to meet their friends. That kills me." By saying this line, Salinger reflects some of Holden's loneliness. Earlier in the book, when Holden arrived at Penn Station, he said, "I felt like giving someone a buzz. I couldn't think of anybody to call up." In a sense, Holden realizes his loneliness and alienation from society when the little girl mentions that she will see her friends. Holden is upset at the loneliness of adolescence. And here's a picture of Stradlater punching Holden. Next. So let's talk about a recurring theme in this course: loneliness and depression. Since this is my last piece of work before the end of this course, I thought I would connect this to the first assignment that I completed, A Rose for Emily, the short story by William Faulkner. The significant themes in Salinger's novel revolving around Holden reminded me of Faulkner's short story, which revolves around Emily. Aside from the story's setting and the main character's age difference, the themes of loneliness and alienation were strongly present in both of those literature pieces. Both of the characters felt isolated and alienated from the rest of society. They were both non-traditional characters that are not seen often in stories. On top of that, both characters had an everyday life, a very normal one actually, until a tragic death of a loved one. For Emily, it was her father's death, and Ali's death for Holden. After the death of their loved ones, the characters had a shift of heart and personality, both experiencing many negative feelings and thoughts. Both Emily and Holden became devastated and felt alone after the death of their loved ones. To summarize, overall, the theme of loneliness and depression is prevalent in J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye. Holden Caulfield is alienated throughout the novel, through either his actions and thoughts or by being rejected by others. Holden is not a typical teenager. He does not fit society's expectations nor his peers' expectations. Holden experiences and recognizes his loneliness and depression by stating his feelings. Despite that he tried to build new connections and strengthen older ones, connecting with others is a weakness for Holden. In a sense, Holden being alone is a blessing and a curse. It protects him and harms him simultaneously. His loneliness protects him from the comments of others, their rejections, and it stops him from attachment to others. On the other hand, his loneliness harms him by allowing him to live in his head and create unrealistic goals and fantasies. In spite of everything, Holden is a person and people need human interactions to stay sane. Hence, his isolation and alienation from society protect him and harm him. Regardless, it makes him feel lonely and depressed. Now, let's move on to the discussion questions. So, my first discussion question is, what are some similarities between Holden Caulfield and his sister, Phoebe? Compare and contrast. My second question, how did the ending make you feel? Does Salinger provide closure for the reader? 3. Does Holden show consistency in his beliefs and actions? If not, when did this discrepancy occur? Next. 4. Are there any main literary devices that Salinger used throughout the novel? Were you able to spot any symbolism in the book? Question 5. After reading J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye, would you watch it if it was remade as a movie? Why or why not? Question 6. After completing J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye, would you recommend it to a friend? And with that, I've reached the end of my presentation. Here's my works cited page. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed.